615 Sessions podcast. I think this is Mike Wilson of the Knoxville News Sentinel's first appearance on the 615 Sessions podcast as my alarm goes off so graciously and professionally around here. Michael, it's lovely to see you, and I cannot wait to discuss everything that is going on in Knoxville, Tennessee. I need a cigarette after spending this much time on the internet this morning. You look exhausted, but you also look well.
Yeah, I mean, all I know is that Tennessee basketball moved up to number 6 in the Associated Press poll today. Did something else happen? Because that's what I know.
That's all there is to be known, because everything else is unknown at this point. There's just been a nuclear wasteland taking place on Rocky Top in a way that is just it has to be so incredibly frustrating to be a fan of this college football program. But I guess I don't even know where to start. The people who are listening to this know and understand what has taken place. Jeremy Pruitt has been fired for cause. 9 other football assistants have gone along with him. Philip Fulmer is retiring, of course, with no knowledge of the situation allegedly that would cause Jeremy Pruitt to vacate his position without buyouts. But Mike, where do you even begin? What has your day been like? I guess take us through that first and foremost.
Oh, goodness gracious. I woke up to a phone call from one of my bosses saying, we need you to start an AD hot board.
Yep.
Which immediately my reaction was, excuse me, I think I've missed about 9 pieces of a conversation. And yeah, I mean, so we kind of got word pretty early this morning that things were going to happen today. And it's been so interesting trying to cover this program the last few weeks. I'm also our basketball writer, so I've been in that world largely. But at the same time, we've known there's this internal investigation going on. It's been a matter of time. So once we knew that, we already had a lot of these things written. I mean, Pruitt fired story's been written since probably November. Hot board's been written and updated since November. I wrote a best quotes story because that's one of my favorite things to do. It's just memorable quotes of a tenure. We've had those things in the bank for a while, but obviously the wild elements of today were the for cause component of this, which is a recent development, given that Jeremy Pruitt's meeting with Tennessee was just meeting with the investigation was late last week. So that's recent. That's a recent development. And obviously Philip Fulmer stepping down, stepping aside, retiring, whatever you want to call it, is obviously also a new development that wasn't necessarily expected as part of Jeremy Pruitt being fired.
The good news, I guess, is that Tennessee doesn't have to foot the bill for the firings of the coach and his staff now, if you want to look on the bright side of things. But then they have this press conference today, Mike, to talk about everything that's gone down within the football program. And you have Donde Plowman, you have Philip Fulmer, you have various members of the athletic department and of the administration sitting up there. And I watched in disbelief as Philip Fulmer was asked to describe the tenure of Jeremy Pruitt as the head football coach of the Tennessee Volunteers. And he goes through, we started, I'm paraphrasing, of course, we started with the program in a difficult position, on and on and on. And the recruiting been good, but then stops himself like as if it's one of the best facial expressions I have ever seen on somebody who's just shitted themselves in the middle of a comment. Like, what was it? Describe the scene for us there. I'm sure all of these things were done virtually, given the global pandemic that oversees all of this. But how did you experience the press conference that followed in the aftermath?
I mean, that comment was classic, I guess. Shocking. I don't really know what the right word is there, but
beautiful. That's the right word. Beautiful.
Yeah, not wrong. I mean, the recruiting was good, but in light of a coach being fired over recruiting violations, basically, and level 1, level 2 NCAA rules violations, and your lead recruiter, Brian Niedermeyer, being fired for cause over the same stuff. I mean, Niedermeyer was named the 2019 24/7 Sports National Recruiter of the Year.
Right.
I mean, and so you're talking about recruiting in a moment where you've just fired a coach and the recruiting department, player personnel department, all of this, it's wild. But it was such an odd press conference in many ways. And that's, again, a Tennessee thing. The weirdest press conference I've ever covered to this day was the Philip Fulmer as the AD press conference that came like 3 hours after John Curry was let go, suspended, I think at the time, but Philip Fulmer hired. It was just this big celebration. I'm sitting there like, a guy just lost his job like 3 hours ago. Like, and like, what's going on? But today was strange too. It was Donnie Plowman and Randy Boyd definitely went out of their way to make a statement that Philip Fulmer's retirement has nothing to do with this investigation, and he's going to step aside, let the next AD hire the football coach, all this stuff. But it was almost too much of Philip Fulmer praise to where it was strange. I also think that's a smart play though in Knoxville, where Philip Fulmer does have a lot of support for the other half of the leadership at Tennessee to say those things and do those things. But just an odd press conference, obviously limited as well in what they can say at this point. So, but I thought the best comment or the most telling comment was Randy Boyd. If you can't win the right way, you don't belong here. I think that kind of gives you an indication of where Randy Boyd and Donnie Plowman want to go with this thing.
Sure. The optics of coddling football legend Phil Fulmer to keep things, status quo for the fan base that is just rabid and furious and sad and God knows what else. I mean, the internet is a bad sample size for any kind of emotion whatsoever, but Vol Twitter is lit, and I have not been able to remove myself from it all day. It's incredible. I look at this, and part of me, I say tongue in cheek, like I can't get enough of all things Tennessee football because they exist in this just perpetual cycle of insanity. Where I saw a tweet from Ross Dellinger at Sports Illustrated to recap: Tennessee has no athletic director, just fired its football coach for cheating, is prepared to have serious NCAA sanctions levied against it, is beginning a fifth head coaching search in 12 years and hadn't won a conference title since 1998. Like, Mike, you've been there long enough. You've covered Tennessee athletics long enough. How the hell does this end? Is there any end to it? Or does the bottom, every time I think they've found the bottom for there no longer to be a fallout, they just keep sinking?
It's funny. I did a TV hit with Emily Proud earlier at WKRN, and she basically asked if this will be calmer than the 2017 coaching search, or if I think that it could go better. And I was like, no, like it can't. Like the amazing thing to me about covering Tennessee athletics is the stability doesn't exist. It's always madness. It's always chaos. There's no sense of normalcy in anything. And that's in the football coaching situation, the athletic department. It's clear that there's just so many things going in so many different directions. And to me, that's the only way you end up with 5 coaching searches in 12 years. Obviously Kiffin is kind of an exception there with how he left, but it's just a wild, frantic place all the time. And I don't know where Tennessee goes from here exactly, because you got to take care of the AD first. And Donnie Plowman made that clear that that's their priorities, get an AD in place. I think there's going to be some good choices for them in that. And it's easier to get an AD in here. But the challenge then is with a football coach, what's going to happen with the NCAA stuff? Because whatever the level of that stuff is going to be, which won't be known right away, is going to have a big say in what caliber of coach they're going to get in here. And if Tennessee doesn't want to be in the same exact spot in 3 years again, they've got to get a good coach in here that can provide stability and a future in this program. And I think Philip Fulmer said they're looking for a guy who will be the coach for 10 years. Doesn't exist in many places anymore. So that's a lofty goal. But I think the NCAA stuff is going to play a huge role in what Tennessee does from here.
Well, and you look at places like Auburn that were looking at a guy like Hugh Freeze and were essentially told by the NCAA, no, your basketball program's already under investigation. This is not, the optics of this are not something that we would condone. So even the Tennessee fans who would want Hugh Freeze in a situation like this are facing likely the same kind of scenario. But you bring up that comment by Philip Fulmer about looking for the head coach for the next 10 years. Mike, that sounds like such a dated way of thinking from somebody who is supposed to have an integral knowledge of the sport and as the game is currently being played, not just on the field, but just the optics around it, the for lack of a better term, just the environment that he's supposed to be in. How much does that kind of, I know maybe I'm digging too deep into this, but like, does that kind of speak to a level of ignorance from Philip Fulmer about what college football is right now?
I don't know if it's ignorance. I think it's probably wishfulness. And it does speak to his time as a coach, obviously, when I think the leash was longer on a lot of coaches. It wasn't the massive buyout culture and all the things that we're so accustomed to now. But the reality is, I don't know a number of how many Power Five coaches have been at a school for 10 years or more, but it's not many. And certainly in the SEC, it's probably only Nick Saban at this point. I mean, those guys don't exist anymore. I mean, you have to win at an alarmingly high level to maintain a job for more than a decade, or overachieve at a program that doesn't have expectations. I mean, those are kind of the two ways that you stick it out at a program for that long now. And that doesn't exist at many places. Tennessee is not a place that's going to exist because Tennessee's expectations are winning big, and they haven't won big in a long time. So I don't know who would be a 10-year coach for Tennessee, but it was an interesting comment to me from Philip Fulmer. And I think it was more wishful than ignorant. But yeah, it does certainly speak to his knowledge of what the coaching situation looked like 15 years ago.
Is this a good job?
It is, depending on the NCAA stuff.
Okay.
I think the challenge to me with the Tennessee job is it's not what it used to be. Tennessee was a great job, kind of that 90s through mid 2000s stretch when other SEC programs were down. And that's the way that a lot of conferences work. I mean, I covered Michigan State for 3 years. Their 3 best years, probably in program history right there in 13, 14, and 15, Rose Bowl, college football playoff, all that stuff. They were good when Michigan was down. Penn State was down. Ohio State was good, but not where they are now.
Right.
And not that Tennessee and Michigan State are the same caliber, but programs tend to succeed more when their rivals are down. Florida and Georgia aren't down right now. Alabama's not down right now. So it's a good job, but I think the expectations have to be realigned for it to be that. It's got the facilities, got the fan base, got the recruiting infrastructure. I mean, they recruit well, if you didn't know. So all the things that you want in a job are there. It's just a matter of what are the expectations here. And then it's getting this program to a place where it can compete with the schools that are kicking its butt every single year right now on the field. And that includes Kentucky, for that matter, too, right now.
Oh my God, what an interesting place that they find themselves. So the Knoxville News Sentinel put out a best quotes piece from Jeremy Pruitt, from the tenure of Jeremy Pruitt. What were among, because I mean, Butch Jones, there was nobody better with Champions of Life and 5-Star Hearts and all the brick by brick. I mean, the list goes on and on. I miss him so much for just the soundbite alone. But when you go back through the brief tenure of Jeremy Pruitt, what kind of quotes, funny or otherwise, stand out to you?
You know, it's funny. Before we get there, my first day on this beat was the day that Butch Jones said that Shy Tuttle fell in a helmet. I mean, I started, like, that was my first morning, first press conference. That was the starting point for me. So I've never known anything but insanity on this beat. Jeremy Pruitt packed some good ones in there. There was Do Your Civic Duty, Man. After Jeremy Banks was arrested, that like 4 a.m. phone call with a cop, like, Do Your Civic Duty, Man. Mm-hmm. Last year after they won the bowl game, he said to the team in the locker room, this will be the decade of the Vols. I mean, that aged as well as Phil Fulmer saying the Vols are back.
So good.
On signing day last year. But my personal favorite, just for the humor of it, was it was after they were 0-2 that start last year in 2019. He compared the program to the Titanic. In saying, you know, the movie when the mice run to the top, he's like, you know, we're finding out who wants to stay with us and all that stuff. And I'm like, but those mice were still on a sinking ship.
Yep.
So those were 3 of the really good ones, for certain. Closing the gap with Alabama was another one that I put in there, because that's just after you lose by 31 points and you've been losing to them by 30 points for years, you're not closing the gap. So yeah, he had some good ones. I mean, and I mean, it was It's a sad thing that you put together a quote notebook when a coach gets fired, but there are some amusing things that get said throughout the years when a coach talks to the media as often as the Tennessee football coach does.
Right. Nobody's out here celebrating a man and several people losing their job. Of course, you know, the that can get lost. That can be desensitized in the jokes. And listen, I'm as guilty as anybody. I've been having a field day on Twitter with GIFs and memes and all manner of all manner of ways to poke the fan base a little bit because they're just, God bless them, they are just so out of their mind, rightfully so. But it's always interesting to go back and look at those kind of things because for what people kind of make football coaches and people in college athletics or pro sports, whatever the case may be, as these great leaders of men and philosophers and things like that. You go back and look at the quotes and be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like who at the God, it makes me so angry the way that people kind of romanticize this stuff. When you go back and read it 2-3 years after the fact, you're like, this guy had no idea what the hell he was talking about.
I mean, and this is not meant to be demeaning toward football coaches, but most of these guys they want to coach football.
Yeah.
I mean, the media stuff is fluff for a lot of these guys. And I get that. I mean, it being a job that we both have, it's fluff to a lot of these guys. And it's something that if they had the choice, I don't think they would want anything to do with. I mean, they're paid handsomely to do it, but it's not, Jeremy Pruitt is a football coach. He's an X's and O's, coach him up football coach. He doesn't want to come and talk to me, Blake Topmeyer, and all of us goons on a Monday and a Wednesday, go do vol calls on a Wednesday. I mean, these are things that are required with the job. No, these guys don't want to do that. They just want to go win games and coach players up. So yeah, there's bound to be some memorable moments and all of those things, but hey, I put my foot in my mouth just about 10 times a day. So I'm glad there's not a microphone for all of my stuff.
Unfortunately for me, there is. Everything is documented. Yeah. Everything is recorded. And
I was more directed at you than anyone else. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that subtle shot by Mike Wilson of the Knoxville News Sentinel. You have had an incredibly busy day. It's going to only get busier from here on out. We look forward to keeping tabs on all things Vols. You can follow him on the socials at by Mike Wilson, wherever it is that you choose to get your volunteer news. There's going to be a lot of it in the coming days. Mike, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you for having me on.